with you today a little bit about the festival of Hanukkah. Presently, we're in the month of Kislev. Kislev is the month in which the festival of Hanukkah falls out on. Falls out on the 25th of the month. Our sages tell us that Chanuka is to be broken up into two words. Chanu kafhe. Chanu means they encamped. Kafhe is in gematria. Numerology is 25, the 25th day of the month. On the 25th day of the month, our people rested from all of their battles. Now, for some reason, the festival of Hanukkah has become one of the very special festivals in the minds of the Jewish people. There is almost no Jew in the world today that doesn't light Hanukkah candles. Now, I'm reminded of a story that I read in a fantastic book many years ago, a book written by Rabbi Meir Kahana, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, called Why Be Jewish? He opens up in this book, Why Be Jewish, and I suggest that anybody who can get their hands on a copy should read it. It's a fantastic book, especially for anyone that grew up in Jewish America. He writes in the beginning of his book about one of his congregants when he was a pulpit rabbi. He had one congregant, he says, we'll call him Shmuel for lack of a name. This one congregant, he said, kept nothing. He didn't keep Shabbos. He didn't even come for Yom Kippur. He was a paying member of the shul. But outside of that, he really kept nothing except for one thing. Every year on the lawn of his yard, he would build this tremendous, tremendous menorah. And every night, like the minhag is on Hanukkah, he would light an extra light on this tremendous menorah. So one day, Rabbi Kahana came up to him and he says to him, Shmuel, I have to know, I have to understand. I mean, listen, you don't keep anything. You don't keep any of the other mitzvahs. What is it about Hanukkah that makes you decide that you want to keep it and you want to do it in such a tremendous way? So Shmuel looked at Rabbi Kahana and he said, Rabbi, look around you. If you look around you in Chutz La'aretz, you look around in America, you look around in England, you'll see that many of the houses are decorated with these gaudy Christmas lights. And he says, I'll never let the non-Jews get the better of us. That was the answer that he gave to Rabbi Kahana. So let's ask ourselves the basic question, what is this day about? The truth is that it's a historical festival. As opposed to the festivals laid out in the Torah, Hanukkah is a festival which is fully, from our sages, it's fully midirabanan. Now, what is it based on? During the time of 199 BCE, up until 165 BCE, right, that's following the Christian era. I know that that's the more familiar date system for everyone, that's why we're using it. That was the time that the Seleucids, all right, the Greek Seleucids from Syria controlled the land of Israel. And basically, after the conquest of Israel, the Greeks only said one thing to the Jewish people. They said, be Greek. They said, you want to fulfill your own mitzvahs? No problem, we have no problem with that. Just be Greek. Now, what did the Greeks do? Basically, what happened was whenever they would conquer a new place, they would take the gods of that nation, they'd add it to their tremendous pantheon, and they would say, okay, listen, now your God is part of our gods, and since we worship them, you can worship them as well, right? We'll all be together, we'll all be Greek, everything will be hunky-dory. So that's what the Greeks basically asked of the Jews. However, there were a couple of things that stood out, a few mitzvahs that stood out that they just couldn't abide with. There were three mitzvahs originally that the Greeks made an enactment against. They were the mitzvahs of Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, right, the beginning of the new Jewish month, and Mila, circumcision. Why did they have a problem with these three mitzvahs? Very simple, because these three mitzvahs, all of them say basically the same thing. You Jewish people, you're different than the rest of the world. For example, the Gemara in Megillah says that the Jewish people throughout history were always different than the rest of the world. Why? While the rest of the world had a 7-day work week, the Jews, whenever Shabbos came about, would say, it's Shabbos, can't do no work. When the festivals would come around, the Jews would say, oh, it's our Jewish festival, can't do no work. So the Jews were always considered to be a lazy people because we took time off in order to rest on our holy days. Shabbos, therefore, we couldn't accept. They couldn't accept, rather. Rosh Chodesh as well, if you recall, the lesson that we learned about Jewish time, about the monthly yearly cycle. So we mentioned there that during the monthly yearly cycle, a little bit of leeway was given to the Jewish people to establish when the month comes about, which pushes off, which affects when the Jewish festivals themselves occur. The Jewish Rosh Chodesh, therefore, the ability of which, the decision of which was given over to the hands of the Sanhedrin, was therefore problematic. How could you, Jews, be different than all the other nations? All the other nations, the months are set, right? The 30 days has September, April, June, and November, etc., etc., right? You have to keep the set months of the year. Why do you have to be different? You should be just like us. They couldn't accept Rosh Chodesh for that reason. Lastly, Brit Milah, the circumcision. The Jews we're commanded that every Jewish male from 8 days and on has a commandment, unless it's a deathly dangerous problem, has a commandment to circumcise himself or his son. Now, that was something that the Greeks did not agree with at all. The Greeks felt that man was created perfect, and for somebody to go and play with that perfection, therefore, was not a good thing. It was for that reason that the three things that bothered them most, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, the Jewish new month, and the mitzvah of circumcision, enactments were made against so that we shouldn't keep them. Those three mitzvahs, the rest they said we can handle. You have festivals, we have festivals. Okay, we're going to stick your God within our pantheon of gods, and therefore you can have your festivals. We don't care about festivals. Now, really what we're looking at over here is a question of God versus gods, or rather, to be a special nation versus, or a separate nation rather, as opposed to being a cosmopolitan nation. The Jewish people, and the Torah itself tells us that we were never supposed to be a cosmopolitan nation. We're supposed to be a separate nation. We're supposed to be different. Adrabah, just the opposite. We're supposed to be a light unto the nations. In order to be a light to the nations, the Torah tells us, be separate. Now, that was not the way of the Greeks. The Greeks wanted to mold everyone. They wanted it to be, this was the original melting pot of yesteryear. They wanted everybody to act like the Greeks. When in Rome, be like the Romans, as the saying goes. Well, when in Greece, be like the Greeks. That's exactly what they wanted of every place they conquered. Let's just make one big Greek nation. Okay, that would be the end of the story. It's a difficult choice. For many Jews, the choice was too difficult, and therefore they decided that they would join the Greek philosophy, and they would join the Greek customs and become Greek. They were called misyavnim in Hebrew. Those that became, literally it means those that became like the Greeks. Now, in order to do that, in order to find acceptance within Greek society, one of the things that they did is they underwent a very painful and many times deathly dangerous operation in order to uncircumcise themselves. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, but they were willing to do it in order to join Greek society. That's how much they desired to do so. Most of the Jews, however, or at least a large segment of the Jews, refused to accept upon themselves Greek philosophy and Greek customs, and especially not the Greek gods. That was something they didn't want to do. What's the difference? What's the real argument that's going on here? The real argument that's going on here is a person supposed to perfect themselves in life, or is a person to be perfect? Do we look for beauty that is inherent, the beauty of the person that the Greeks so greatly worshipped? Or do we look at the beauty that's inside a person that a person can actually affect and change? Such a tremendous argument in ideology just can't go together. And the truth is, it's because of this feeling of distinction, this feeling of separatism, this feeling of we have a Torah, which was given to us directly from God that tells us this is the way we're supposed to act, that many of the Jews, being true to our stiff-necked nature, right, the Torah calls us Am Kshei Oref, we're a nation with stiff necks. It's because of this nature that we could not accept upon ourselves Greek rule, we could not accept upon ourselves Greek customs, and therefore we wound up rebelling. But that wasn't enough. The truth is that our sages tell us one of the more famous enactments made against the Jews was something called Kitvu Lachem al Keren Ashor She'ein Lechem Chelik Belokei Yisrael. Kitvu Lachem, you should write for yourselves al Keren Ashor, on the horn of a bull, She'ein Lechem Chelik Belokei Yisrael, that you do not have a portion or a lot with the God of Israel. Now, why did they do that? There are many interpretations that have been given to what in the world this truly means. If I'm to give the simplest explanation that I can, I would say the following. Keren Ashor, the horn of the bull was worshipped as the symbol, the living symbol of the Greek god Zeus from the Greek pantheon. The intention was that the Jewish people should write a bill of sale, Ke'ilu, on It's as if they're writing a bill of sale on their portion in life with God. They say, look, we're signing on with this God, and we're giving up on our God, Elokei Yisrael, the God of our forefathers. Now, this is an actual enactment according to the book, Sefer HaChashmonaim, the book of the Hasmoneans, which is part of the Apocrypha. And the truth is that the Jews, being the stiff-necked nation that they were, when they heard this, what did they do? It says that all of the people got up and they sold their bulls. They said, oh, you wanted to tell us that we should write on the horns of our bulls that we don't have a portion with God. Well, if we don't have a bull, we don't have to do it. So what did they do? They said, let's sell the bulls. End of story. And that's what they did. But eventually, the enactments of the Greek against the Jews became such that the Jews said, no more, we can't handle it anymore. So what did they do? The Sefer HaChashmonaim records that it was in the city of Modi'in that the local magistrate decided that he wanted to have a public sacrifice of a pig to the god Zeus. And that there was a mityaven, there was I forget what it's called in English, a Greek wannabe named Philippus who wanted to take part in that service. Now, it happened to be that in the city of Modi'in lived a fellow named Matityahu who was a former Kohen Gadol. He was kicked out when the Greek took over, and the office of Kohen Gadol was sold basically to the highest bidder. So Matityahu was there, and he decided that he'd had enough, and he said, called out to the amassed people, he says, you know what? Here I am, I'm a Kohen, I'm an old man. He was in his 90s at the time, apparently. He said, I'm an old man, who better than me would it be to give the sacrifice? So what did he do? The Greek magistrate was so happy with this that he called up both the volunteer, Philippus, and the old Kohen Gadol, Matityahu. They called him up to give the sacrifice together. Now what happened was that Matityahu, when he was up on top of the altar, he revealed himself for what he really intended to do. And he basically took the sacrificial knife and sacrificed Philippus instead of the pig. At this point, it's recorded that he called out, Mi la Hashem Elai, who is for Hashem, come to me. And his sons came to help him out. That was the beginning of the Hashmonean revolt. Now, his 5 sons, the most famous of whom was Yehuda, Judah the Maccabee, as he is called. He, as I said, Matityahu himself was probably in his late 80s or early 90s at this point in life. His sons were young whippersnappers. They were in their late 60s, early 70s when this happened. And even though they were such a small amount of people versus the big Greek legions, they didn't care. They said, I'm doing it l'shem shamayim. We, the Jewish people, have to be able to worship our God freely. And that's what they did. They began a process of guerrilla war against the Greek people. Now, most of the times, the Hasmonaim, the Jews, were heavily outnumbered. The pinnacle of their career really was their last war, in which there were 800 Jews against several tens of thousands of Greek warriors. And not only Greek warriors, they came with chariots, they came with war elephants, they came with the greatest military might of that day and age. They came against 800 Jews, some of which were advanced ages, right? 60 to 70, as I mentioned before. And even so, it was at that point in time, right, they had originally had 3,000 people, 2,200 ran away, they were left with 800 roughly, and those 800 Jews went to war and won. It was after this tremendous triumph of Judah and his warriors that they decided that the time had come to free the Beit HaMikdash, right, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, from the hands of the Greek. And they ran immediately to Jerusalem, where they reconquered the city and they reconsecrated the temple. Now, one of the reasons that we know this is because we say a tefillah to this day during the festival of Hanukkah called Al Hanisim. In Al Hanisim we say, Bimei Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. It was during the times of Matityahu, the son of Yochanan, the Kohen Gadol, right, that they revolted against the Greek people. What was the entire revolt? The entire revolt was Rabim Biyad Matim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. God gave us a multitude of people in the hands of a few. Risha'im Biyad Tzadikim, evildoers into the hands of the Tzadikim. And what Tzadikim are we talking about? We're talking about elderly people. But they were there, they all wanted with such a fervent desire to be free to worship their God, the God of their fathers. And that's what they did. They came, they conquered the temple. The temple had been defiled by the Greeks. And it wasn't just defiled. It wasn't just that they walked in and said, oh, here's a temple. Let's defile it a little bit. They didn't do that. it says that they organized a commando of Greeks to go through the temple and destroy it as much as they could. They opened up new holes in the gates around the Mikdash. They tried to make as much of the pure oil and the pure utensils. They desecrated them. They sacrificed a pig on the altar, which is absolutely forbidden according to the Torah. And because of all that, the Mikdash, the holy temple in Jerusalem, needed to be reconsecrated. It needed to be rebuilt. And that's what they set about to do. And after the rebuilding process, when they came to light the Hanukkah candles, they came to light the lights of the menorah, they found that the menorah had no oil. The Torah tells us specifically that only a certain type of oil can be used for the sake of lighting the menorah. Shemen zayit zach. It has to be pure oil. What does pure oil mean? Our sages tell us pure oil means that you take an olive, you squeeze out one drop. That one drop is good to use for the menorah specifically. The rest of the oil that's in the olive can be used for other purposes. But for the menorah, you need that first little drop, shemen zayit zach, the absolute purity of oil. Now, the problem was that they had some oil like that, but it was all tameh, it was all impure. And in order to rebuild and reconsecrate the Mikdash, they couldn't use unconsecrated oil, or rather this oil which is called tameh. They had to use something which was purified. They had to use something which was ritually pure, ritually clean. It had to be tahor. So they went and they had to find something in order to light the menorah. Our sages tell us in this tractate Shabbat on page 21b rather, that they ran all over the Mikdash and they found one small vial of oil that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it. And that in itself was a miracle. Right? Who in the world? The Kohen Gadol himself was not somebody that went out and gave kashrus. He didn't make things kosher. Why was there a vial with the seal of the Kohen Gadol? That itself was a miracle that it was there. Right? Apparently, the Kohen Gadol, through one of the generations, had gone and done it, and it had been in safekeeping until it was needed this specific day. Unfortunately, what happens is that in order to get new oil, it was a process. It took 8 days. So what were they supposed to light? They had enough oil here, maybe to light for a day. It's not clear. Was it enough? Was it not enough? Enough to light at least one candle, apparently. But they didn't have for the rest of the days. Like I said, it's an 8-day process to get new oil. What were they supposed to do? So they said, listen, we're lighting for the sake of God, and therefore what they did is the following. They took the vial of oil, and they started pouring, and they poured, and the first candle filled up. They poured the second candle, and it filled up. The third candle filled, until the 8th candle was still full. And they looked in the vial, and it was still full. That's what they did. Every day for 8 days. They poured from the vial, and it filled up. They poured from the vial, and it was still full. 8 days they did that. That was clearly a miracle. Why is this true? Because our sages tell us that God is not limited in time and space. God can put as much as He wants into a tiny little vial if He wants. And therefore, this is something, the truth is, that we find in the Navi itself, a similar story that happened with the prophet Elisha, if you want to look it up, in the book of Kings. So here we have 8 days, a clear miracle was performed. Why was this miracle performed? Because the Jews acted so fervently in order to get back, in order to be able to worship their God with religious freedom. And that's what happened. That's what it was about. So, in memory of that, every year from that time on, we go out and we light a candle. What is this all based on? What's the whole concept behind candles? Our sages tell us it's based on a verse we find in Mishlei, in Proverbs, chapter 6, verse 26, where Shlomo HaMelech tells us, King Shlomo tells us, King Solomon, Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or. A candle is like a mitzvah, and the Torah is like the light. In other words, a Jew is the parable to a Jew is a candle. The Jewish soul has always been attracted to a candle. It's for this reason that people around the world to this day are lighting candles, because everybody knows, I'm going to light this Hanukkah candle. I'm going to perform this mitzvah because that is the sign of a Jew. I know deep in my heart that I have a relationship with God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. I have this relationship and I want to fulfill it. I might not know how, but when I put out that candle and I light it for the sake of mitzvah, I'm showing the world, the Jewish world that is, that I'm part of you, I want to be part of you, show me the way. One candle, say our sages, can dispel a lot of darkness. And therefore, God willing, when we light the Hanukkah candles on the 25th of this month, we should all remember, why are we lighting the candles? We're lighting the candles because we, a small Jewish nation, stood up in our desire to connect, to have a relationship with God above, with God in heaven, Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel. We wanted to connect with Him so much that we could overcome anything, even the mightiest nations of the world. So when you light the candle, remember, you're a Jew. You're showing you're a Jew. Your mitzvahs, your Torah, the light that is inherent in your soul can shine out when you perform the mitzvah.